My name is Dirk Moss. I'm a member of the Painting Commission, City of Town and Country, and I'm grateful to have an alderman here, Alderman Skip Mann from Ward 1.
Thank you.
This would be a good time to turn off cell phones and such. If you're not on my email list for the Green Speaker Series and would like to be, please see me after the talk. I'm sorry, what was that?
Turn my cell phone off, please.
Oh, okay.
Later.
Turn my cell phone. That ugly cardboard box there is full of reusable cloth grocery bags. Take as many as you want, okay? They're free for the taking. Next month, the Green Speaker will be on new urbanism, which is something that, well, the government in Town and Country will never allow here, but it's a very interesting topic on old Europe kind of style development, mixed use. I'm very happy that our speaker is able to join us tonight. She is a native of Virginia. She graduated from Principia College. She taught biology at Principia Upper School, just down here for a few years. Then she married, got dual citizenship, Swedish citizenship, right? And went to school in Sweden and just got a master's in sustainable development. And the topic of her thesis was phosphorus. And we're going to hear about phosphorus from her tonight. Her name is Froggi VanRiper, and very soon she's headed back to Sweden. So please give a warm welcome to Froggi VanRiper.
It's really fun to be back here in Town and Country again. I've been away for 2 years, so it's great to see all the faces. So one of the greatest things that came out of my my master's research was the opportunity to go to the 3rd International Phosphorus Conference, the Sustainable Phosphorus Summit in Sydney, Australia. And it's being filmed. You don't need to film.
I'm just taking pictures. I'm her brother, and I'm going to send this.
Nobody else here makes me nervous. Okay, so anyway, the 3rd International Phosphorus Summit was fantastic. It brought together people from 22 different countries to start to solve these questions, these issues regarding phosphorus, which you're about to learn about if you are already familiar with them. Phosphorus just started being a big international dialogue from a scarcity perspective in about 2006. Between 2006 and 2009, it started to rise to the forefront. For a long time, we've been talking about it as a pollutant. So the Phosphorus Summit was an opportunity to bring together all these questions and realize the common solutions to the different problems involved in phosphorus. So I don't know if you can see from over there, these are the many faces of phosphorus. Phosphorus can be seen in a number of different ways. I'm going to cycle through these and talk about them a little bit. But the first and the newest sort of thing we're becoming aware of is phosphorus as a limited mineral resource. It's a non-substitutable resource. That means that because it's an element, you know, when we talk about reaching peak oil, for example, oil is a fuel source. It's a hydrocarbon. We burn it to produce to release the energy in a way that we can use. Phosphorus, on the other hand, is phosphorus. Right? Well, we can find other things to burn, other things to fuel our cars with, other things to power our power plants with. We cannot find another element that is going to meet the needs of plants, of animal bodies, and fulfill the roles that phosphorus does. So it's a non-substitutable resource. And to understand a little bit the way it moves through the system, it's nice to look at the phosphorus flow. It's one of the few nutrients that doesn't have a cycle within our short-term lifespan. We talk about depletable resources, or we like to call them non-renewable resources. Depletable is another way of looking at this. It does renew over the course of 30 million years. But for our purposes, it's very depletable. Phosphorus is found in the most accessible form in rock. You've heard of phosphate rock, maybe. And if you're from the southeast or have lived around South Carolina down to Florida, there's a lot of phosphate mining down there. There's phosphate rock deposits where geologic uplift has brought these ocean sediments up to a point where we can actually carve away at it and extract the useful phosphorus. Now, in nature, what's actually happening is there's a little bit of that in bedrock all around, and it slowly weathers out of that bedrock, and it runs down through the soils. Now, for a while here, you see a little cycle. For a while, it ends up in the soil, it's taken up by plants, and they make it a part of their tissue. When animals eat the plants, they make it part of their tissue. When they excrete waste, it becomes part of the soil and it's taken up in plant tissue again. And that can move around for a little while, and eventually it gets suspended in water and it runs off to the sea. This is a very, very slow process. In other cases, it just runs straight off to the sea through weathering, through rain. So you've got this slow movement of phosphorus from rock out to the ocean, a little bit of cycling in the middle there. And as it accumulates in ocean sediments, in a matter of 10 to 100 million years, it's going to uplift again with tectonic activity, and there will be more phosphorus cliffs somewhere. We won't be around to see them, but it's going to come back. Now this is a look at where our widely accessible phosphorus reserves are, just on a national level. The actual entire U.S. isn't producing phosphorus, it's just this little tiny fraction of the U.S. over here, but we account for 7.8% of all the world's phosphate rock production. On the other hand, Morocco and the Western Sahara alone produce 37% of the world's phosphate rock. And then China is one of the coastal regions in China, produces 26%. So between Morocco and China, which, as we know, are somewhat politically unstable regions at the moment, are responsible for the vast majority of our phosphate rock that is being transported and used around the world for agricultural and industrial purposes. We also produce a fair amount. Now, the U.S. has really phosphorus-rich soils, so we'll talk about that shortly. Africa, on the other hand, as a whole continent, has very phosphorus-poor soils. This is what happened to the global price of phosphate rock. You want to know why it hit the international dialogue around 2008, 2009? This is why. For generations, phosphate rock had never gone above $38 a metric ton on the global market. And between political instability and the sudden realization that these mineral reserves were depleting themselves, market speculation and a variety of other factors all came together to cause what functionally was an 800% spike in price. This led to a rash of farmer suicides across the Indian subcontinent. It was a tragic loss, underproducing crops all over Africa and India and parts of Asia. Asia has been very dependent on phosphate fertilizers since the Green Revolution of the late 60s, which allowed them to start using these fertilizers and maximize their production. Without them, their productivity is virtually nil compared to what it is with the phosphate fertilizers. And so this was a real tragedy for India and a wide range of people in Asia. And we then saw the price plummet again shortly after that for various reasons. Now, ever since then, it has been ratcheting its way back up. And this is due to the fact that the quality of phosphate reserves has been diminishing. Every year, we use up the best quality phosphate rock, and we slowly move on to the lower quality phosphate rock in the same way that you've heard with petroleum, as we use up the high quality reserves and we start to have to extract the tar sands and things like this. It gets more expensive, the quality goes down, the price starts ratcheting up. And we're already, I mean, compared to historical rates, we're in the $200 a metric ton range now, compared to the generations and generations of under $36 a metric ton. So people are really feeling the effects of this because it's a critical nutrient in agriculture. It's non-substitutable, we talked about that. We need phosphorus to make our crops grow. And in the developed world, we have some very efficient mechanisms for applying phosphorus directly to our crops in large quantities, and this has been going on for generations. Here you see a tractor spraying a liquid phosphorus amendment on what appears to be a soy field. And this is a nutrient-deficient farm in Kenya. And you can see the corn, which has not been amended with phosphate fertilizers. And access to them is severely limited. We'll talk a little bit about why. It's a valuable, recoverable substance. When we go back to our discussion about the way phosphorus flows through the ecosystem, it gets recovered as animals excrete waste. It moves through their ecosystem and they eat what grows in that very same environment. We're not doing that. We have a system where all of our food is produced in one area. It tends to be moved to an urban environment, and then our human excreta is moved out of that urban environment, treated, and the liquid effluent is sent to waterways. So we have high-tech ways of trying to recover this nutrient. One of the things that is actually a problem for sewage waste management people is this buildup inside pipes. It's called struvite. It happens when the phosphates mostly in our urine and the rest of our sewage, come in contact with magnesium and agitation. They actually create this crusty buildup, which, as you can see, makes a big difference in the efficiency of these pipes. So it's actually a problem for a waste management professional. But that in and of itself is a high-quality fertilizer, a high-quality slow-release fertilizer. So I met this gentleman in Sydney who works out of Oregon, and his company manufactures crystal green. And he basically adds these, they're tanks that the sewage goes through at the treatment plant before it gets pumped through these pipes. And they add the magnesium in a controlled environment, and they agitate it, and they precipitate out the struvite into these saleable pellets before it gets clogged in the pipelines. And this is basically a competitor with Osmocote. It's a slow-release phosphorus fertilizer, basically. And you can play with my crystal green later. So that's a high-tech solution for an environment like ours with higher-type sewage systems. But we also have environments that don't have high-tech sewage systems. And if you ever get the opportunity to watch Focus Forward films, a bunch of free short films online, Focus Forward films. One of them is Meet Mr. Toilet. And there's this fantastic gentleman in China who has been working to break the taboo on talking about human excreta. Because part of that taboo results in people using waterways for excreting human waste, the same waterways they then go to get their drinking water. And there's a lot of disease problems associated with that, obviously. And so by breaking that taboo and starting to talk about sanitation and starting to talk about poop as a resource, which it is, he's affecting a great change all over China. But I met another young lady who's doing work in Nepal and has done some work in Africa with composting toilets. So we have the simplest possible version here, which is just a bucket of sawdust. Now for a family that didn't have access to sanitation, this is a huge step for them. Not only does it help them keep their drinking water pure, but then if they set aside these buckets, they can compost and then they can put them on their grazing land, for example, and restore the phosphorus to the soil, which was depleted when they removed the crop or removed the meat from that soil. Now, a slightly higher tech version is the urine diverting toilet. Of all the phosphorus that passes through the human body, actually of any adult animal, When we're growing, our bones are made of phosphorus and our cell membranes are made largely of phosphorus. It's phospholipids. And so we accumulate a fair amount of phosphorus as we're growing. But once we reach maturity, we're doing minor maintenance and upkeep on these cellular structures, and the rest of the phosphorus coming into our body exits. 99% of all the phosphorus we consume exits our body. And so it's ready to be recovered. Now, 80% of that 99% is in the urine alone. And human urine is sterile. I don't know if any of you have ever, I don't know, maybe they did it on Lost or Survivor or something, had to wash a wound with urine. You can do it. It's sterile. And so to harvest the urine separate from the other human waste is a quick and easy way to take it out into a farm field, redeposit it without any of the fecal coliform bacteria or any of these other possible disease-carrying hazards of human waste, while recovering 88% of the phosphorus. And so you can put these urine-diverting toilets in perfectly modern buildings. They can be a water-based flush system. But you can also certainly use them in outhouses. It makes outhouses a lot easier to compost human waste when they divert the urine, because then there's a lower acidity to the waste, and it composts a lot faster. And I ran into this for the first time in Guatemala in 2000, and it was like, wow, look at that. This is just diverted into a bucket, and the farmers just pour it on the field every day. So pretty fascinating. Then somewhere in between, I'm going to show you a cute little video that came out in the University of Sydney, if I can. Oh, maybe. Let's see.
Brothers are handy things they have around once in a while.
You know what I can do? I can just remember this. It used to work. Well, it's okay. Let me go ahead and do a little. Oh, here it is. I guess there's speakers on.
We all know we're running out of oil, but there's something else we're running out of. Phosphorus. Like crude oil, phosphate rock is a non-renewable resource extracted from Earth. And as we approach peak oil, we also approach peak phosphorus, at which point it becomes increasingly expensive and energy intensive to extract. While oil has several viable alternatives, phosphorus is phosphorus is phosphorus. We, like all plants and animals, need phosphorus to live. The plants get their phosphorus from the fertilizer we use, and we get it from the food we eat. While oil can only be used once, however, phosphorus leaves our system in a usable state. Currently, this liquid gold is poured into our regular sewer system, polluting our waterways in the process. But you can help. Don't throw away your precious pee. Close the loop. Go to takingthepee.com to find out more, or visit our urinary diversion toilets on level 2 of building 10.
So the University of Sydney actually installed these on one floor of their university, and they, as a part of a master's study, they had these posters out there, and anybody who came to use those toilets could sort of write their little comments. It was almost like a guest book for the toilets. And it was, and they were researching the response of the public to this, in a very high-tech, this is a University of Technology in Sydney, right? They bring in this urine-diverting toilet, and they're saying, how does the public respond to this? Are we ready for this? And it was really interesting to see the kind of responses we got. It was, because they were still flush toilets, they were still connected to the water-based sewage system, it seemed to go over relatively well. People were a little worried about what direction it was going, everything works out. It's pretty impressive. These things work really well. But that was kind of fun. This is three of the same thing. I did manage to get it to open. I just didn't know. phosphorus as an environmental pollutant. Now you're going to see some of these photos show up again and again. Each of these photos might show up twice because a lot of these problems on one end and problems on the other end have the same solution. You saw the critical limiting nutrient in agriculture picture. Now this is showing up as an environmental pollutant picture. That's because the way that we're applying phosphorus to our crop fields right now, the rate at which we're applying it, is so far greater than what the crops uptake that when the rain comes, it washes away a vast majority of it. They say apparently only 12% of it is taken up by the crops themselves. The rest washes off to waterways. We're talking about a resource that is diminishing, a resource that is non-renewable, and we're throwing away all but 12% of it each time we stick it on our farm fields. There has to be a more efficient way, and there are. I spoke to a farmer this summer when I was doing my research who's investing in an RTK system for his 1,000-acre farm, where his tractor is GPS controlled and it injects specific amounts of fertilizer based on GPS fingerprinted soil tests, only where the nutrients are needed. Now that's a super high-tech solution to this efficiency problem. There's also just been a lot more research on the appropriate times to apply your fertilizer, the appropriate amount for crop uptake, more often doing soil tests on farms. And farmers are responding to this. There's very positive actions, partly because the pollution side we've been aware of this for so long that there are a lot of national and international regulations on the amount of pollution that can exit your farm. If you have a livestock farm, you're required to write a comprehensive nutrient management plan, which is just a fancy way of saying, how am I going to deal with my cow poop? And it's something you legally have to do. And so people are starting to pay, or have been for some time now, pay a lot of attention to efficiency, which is going to address two different sides of this phosphorus question. You've heard of eutrophication, maybe? You certainly see it on golf courses. This is actually why they dye lakes blue on golf courses. It's not to make them pretty. It's to block the light to the algae so you don't get this overflow of algae. Because phosphorus is the critical limiting nutrient in most growing environments. When you add a lot of phosphorus, algae is able to proliferate in ways that it never could before. That was what was limiting it. And so this runoff from lawn fertilizers, the runoff from farms, will occasionally cause, if you live in an ocean environment, red tides. When the cyanobacteria, which is an algae-like bacterium, a photosynthetic bacterium, just explodes in population. Unfortunately, they're high in cyanide, and then they poison all the fish living in that environment, and people shouldn't swim there because it's gross and nasty. You'll see it on farm ponds, you'll see it in rivers sometimes in the worst case scenarios, when there's just tons of phosphorus washing off. So one of the ways of addressing this, besides further efficiency and application, is buffer strip planting. And a lot of the farmers I interviewed this summer employed this method. They would plant a number of non-crop plants along the edges of waterways to absorb as much of the phosphorus as possible as it was running off of their fields. Now this obviously didn't collect all of it, but it did keep this water a little purer. And then to recover that phosphorus, they can actually cut down, and some farmers will do this, cut down this vegetation, bring it back onto the farm either as feed for livestock or to compost, and that keeps that nutrient moving back onto their farm for as long as possible. It's a good additional step. Now Sweden went the extreme way. They built in the livestock density law. They determined that the soil can only absorb 22 kilograms of phosphorus per hectare per year. And so they said, that's how many cows you can have on your land. So this is what a Swedish cattle farm looks like. If anybody's driven through Texas and seen what our cattle farms look like, this is not what they're CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations. There are tens of thousands of cows in one place at one time, creating what amounts to, and what is actually classified as, hazardous waste levels of manure, which had very difficult to address that much manure in one place, both from a disease perspective, from a nutrient recovery perspective, all of the above. Now there have been some great advances in methane digestion and getting energy from it and things like this. This looks like a great solution, but Swedes do love beef, and so they just buy all of ours. So we need to really think about solutions when we're talking about sustainability. This looks great within our national boundaries. We're doing awesome, Sweden. But if you look at our connectivity to the rest of the world, this wasn't the solution unless we're all willing to cut down on our meat consumption. Meat is one of the biggest contributors to the phosphorus overutilization in agriculture. Because animals' bodies and bones are largely comprised, well, as they're growing and developing, they need to consume a great deal of phosphorus. It's one of the most phosphorus-intensive forms of agriculture. Then once they've matured, especially if we're talking about a milk cow, they have a very, very high phosphorus diet. Milk cows do. Their feces has even more phosphorus in it, and that is usually largely getting wasted. A lot of it runs off before it's transported appropriately to an agricultural setting where it can be used as fertilizer. So then we have the environmental and human hazard side of phosphorus. Here is a phosphorus mine in Florida. Now what you see, these piles here on the side are phosphogypsum. It's the byproduct of removing phosphorus from phosphate rock. And phosphogypsum actually has high enough levels of radioactivity that it's not safe to be in contact with those piles. So people engaged in phosphate mining are daily putting themselves in danger of radioactive poisoning, basically. And we have higher labor standards here in the US, but Morocco and the Western Sahara have virtually no labor standards. And so the working conditions in those mines are tragic to behold. And of course, there's nothing we haven't found a use for the phosphogypsum. The best thing we can do with it right now is leave it in these contained piles in places far away from where people live and wait until we've figured out a solution for it. And so we have an environmental hazard there.
Do you know what happens in the mining process that makes the phosphate become a radioactive byproduct?
It actually is already radioactive. What you're doing is you're removing the phosphorus component and then condensing what's left, what's not phosphorus, into this big pile. And that's how you get these unhealthy levels of radioactivity.
Because you're condensing.
Because it's condensing,
Okay.
exactly.
I'm a physicist, so I have to ask this question.
That's a good question. It's a very good question. So this is just a little look at the process of you add sulfuric acid, and that's precipitating out the phosphorus, and then you get your gypsum piles, and then we bring it to different places. So now this is a phosphate mining family in Tunisia. This was part of a human rights campaign looking at the environmental hazards this family has been suffering for generations. They've been phosphate mining, and there has been high levels of cancer in the families, and they were seeking some recognition of the challenge and some way to address this challenge. So finally, our fifth face of phosphorus is a tradable commodity. Obviously, this is an important thing on the global market. And if you look at the trade routes that phosphorus takes, it's hard for you to see the tips of these arrows, but this arrow goes that way, and this arrow goes that way. And no arrows are going into Africa. Basically, North Africa is exporting all of its phosphate, and they're importing none. The US is the largest receiver of phosphate from Morocco. India is the largest receiver of it. They are suddenly increasing dramatically in their agricultural productivity. Their population is booming. Their economy, India is starting to get to that range where they're going out of the developing country world and into that intermediate stage where they have the economic wherewithal to start importing resources like phosphate rock. And they're one of the other largest importers. Brazil is a fairly large importer, although it's not reflected in these arrows here. And Europe is where all of this stuff's been happening, all of this discussion about phosphate. It started in both Sweden and Australia because these places produce no phosphate. They're completely dependent on imports if they're going to increase their agricultural productivity. And so reusing what's on that continent to begin with and finding the most efficient ways of using it is imperative in those two environments. And the US between the fact that we have the economic wherewithal to import as much phosphorus as we do, and the fact that we've been doing this for generations, our soils are just phosphorus rich. When I interviewed my farmers about that 2008 price spike, I asked them, how did it affect you? Did you stop buying that year? Did you see reductions in your crop yields? Did it hurt you economically as a farmer? And every one of the American farmers that I interviewed said, wasn't. The 2008 price spike made no difference to me. One of them said, I bought so much the previous year, I didn't even need to buy any that year. Another farmer said, no, I just didn't apply it, and I just waited it out, because I know the economy always, buffers itself. And of course, he had such phosphorus-rich soil already from over-application that it didn't make a difference to his yields that year. And the only farmer, every farmer I interviewed said it didn't affect them, and the only farmer who said it didn't affect them for a different reason other than I just didn't pay attention to it was the organic farmer, who has a rather impressive operation outside of Bloomington. And he said, well, we just import so little, we recycle so much on our farm that I didn't feel the effects because I wasn't buying it. So that's your trade routes for phosphorus. Again, back to that same map of where is it coming from, our major producers. Now, this is fertilizer consumption. While we see that much moving, we saw a lot moving to India, they still, on a per capita basis, are not importing nearly as much as the US and Europe. Now, the US doesn't need that much phosphorus. It's just habit. And the research shows that agriculturalists are about the slowest of all industries to adapt to change. Partly because change happens over the course of many, many years in an environmental context. So if people sort of jumped on something in the short term, that's usually not a good idea in agriculture. So agriculturalists tend to be kind of laid back and to just ride these things out and wait until years and years have shown them that something is the right practice before they start to adopt new practices. And I definitely saw that with the farmers that I interviewed. So the US is still a major importer of phosphorus despite really not needing to. Now Europe does need to, and Australia definitely needs to. Australia is the biggest importer right now because they have absolutely none, and they are increasing their agricultural productivity year after year after year. Africa, exporting a ton and importing almost none. Which leads us to the next map, which is areas suffering from undernourished populations. And you see those undernourished populations are all in sub-Saharan Africa. Over 35% of everybody in these red regions, on average, is suffering from malnutrition or not making enough food for themselves. And this is largely due to the fact that they have not had the opportunity to amend their soil with phosphorus because they don't have the economic status to import what they're exporting. Yes?
So India has 20 to 34% population undernourished. I remember you saying before that India was importing a lot.
Yes, and that's a very recent thing.
Oh, okay.
Just as they've become economically able to start importing it, and their population is still growing at a rate that is almost matching that import. They're just keeping up with themselves. But we should see that, actually we should see hopefully the orange lighten out there. Hopefully all of these colors will start moving towards green as we adopt more sustainable practices. But this is the way it stands right now. And so that critical limiting nutrient, now we in the US, we need to cut back on our application. We need to improve our efficiency. One of the important dialogues that was going on at this phosphorus conference, because of course it was largely attended by those who had the financial wherewithal to get there. But there was a lot of representation in Europe and America, and they were talking efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And the representative of the African Nutrient Council stood up and he said, we just need it, period. We need phosphorus. All this efficiency talk is great, but can we just have some? So it was a very poignant moment for all of us to realize that there's more than one dialogue that needs to be going on here. There's the overconsumption, and then there's just utter lack. And again, we go back to this family, because despite the horrible working conditions, despite the fact that they are suffering from illness as a result of this, this is their income, and it's their only income. And if we just ripped it out from underneath them, they would have no income. So it's not as simple of an answer in that context as just, let's not do this anymore. So see all of those different faces, many of the challenges have a single solution, right? The challenge of it being limited and being a pollutant. Both of those are solved through increased efficiency and reduced consumption, right? Or not solved, but, well, yes. Hopefully we can solve them. If we maximize our recycling capacity, maximize our ability to capture phosphorus and restore it to agricultural systems, then we're really going to make a dent in these limitation problems and environmental pollutant problems. There are a wide variety of different challenges and different solutions that are being explored. But where we come into the picture, so of course this is a whole global discussion, where do we come into the picture? We have a couple of things we can do. We can eat organic, which does not involve the excessive use of phosphate fertilizers. We can grow some of our own food. We can reduce our meat consumption. I don't say stop it, just reduce it. There's a suggestion of 1 meat meal per week as about what the earth could sustain right now. We have a tendency, I notice when you go to Cracker Barrel, you can't even get a veggie side without meat. There's bacon bits in your mashed potatoes and green beans. We really do like our meat. But can we reduce our consumption? Equity politics. Be at least aware of equity politics, aware of the international dialogues that are going on regarding trade. Never, ever, ever landfill food. We can compost at home. If you're excited about worms, burn compost at home, which is less smelly and more in your kitchen. But there's my dad just puts it out and lets the foxes eat it because he likes to see the foxes. So there's all kinds of ways of making sure that the phosphorus from your food doesn't go to a landfill where we're not going to recover it. Use phosphate-free detergents because any phosphorus going into our sewage treatment plant has to be removed before it either causes eutrophication on the out end or is lost to our system. Stop putting chemicals down the drain. This doesn't relate to the phosphate detergents. This is any chemicals. Because one of our biggest challenges in the US right now with recovering these nutrients from sewage, now we can just precipitate out this really expensive struvite product, but just putting the sewage sludge on agricultural land isn't possible because it's so chemical intensive. Because we can put anything down our drain that's virtually unregulated. If you think of any of the household cleaners that you purchase, and you consider pouring a diluted version of that in your garden, you'd balk. But that's what would be happening if we tried to recover the nutrients from our sewage sludge. So we use it for road embankments, for revegetation, for when they cover over a landfill and turn it into a golf course. We try, right? But in many cases it's incinerated because that's the only way to handle all of that, the solid sludge that comes out of the sewage after it's been treated. Consider alternative waste management in your home. Maybe you want to install a urine diverting toilet. If you've ever had the opportunity to tour the Tyson Research Center, they have a full-scale composting toilet. It doesn't smell. It's 2-story, so upstairs it looks like a regular toilet. You get out a completely sanitary product in the end. And considering what Dirk said about town and country and new urban approaches, it might be the sort of thing you're not allowed to put in your house around here. We should find out. St. Louis has gone back and forth on that, and I think they've finally reached the point where they are permitting. There's nothing not to permit about a composting toilet. It's one of the most awesomely high-tech things. If you get the chance to see one. We're not talking about an outhouse here. And of course, there's the option of peeing in your garden. But
Is there nitrogen in your
There is nitrogen in urine, yes. No,
what else is in there?
Well, it's uric acid. But as far as nutrients are concerned, there's a lot of nitrogen and there's a lot of phosphorus. You usually want to dilute urine if you're putting it directly on crops because it's actually strong enough to burn them. If anybody has a dog who always pees on the same bush, dies, right? So you need to dilute it, but the nutrient is there. But that's I'm glad you brought up the question of nitrogen, because what we have to understand is the difference between phosphorus and nitrogen in organic agriculture. Somehow organic agriculture needs to get some kind of excreta back. Because every time you export a crop, every time you export a vegetable or a cut of meat or anything from your farm, that phosphorus is leaving your farm. And there's no way to get it back without bringing the excreta back. or something that's been precipitated from the excreta. Nitrogen, after it's decomposed, after the organic substance is decomposed, ends up going up in a gaseous form. Most of our atmosphere is just nitrogen gas, right? Or there's a fair amount of it out there. And also there's, NO2 and N2O, and there's all these different forms of gaseous nitrogen which are breathed in by bacteria in the soil. And that's why you'll see a crop rotation that'll go corn, soy. They call soy a nitrogen-fixing crop. It's a legume. It has a relationship with these little bacteria that live in its roots, and they breathe in the nitrogen in the air, and then they turn it into a solid organic substance that can be uptaken by plants. So nitrogen, through appropriate crop management, can be handled on your soil, and we don't have to produce nitrogen fertilizers using petroleum, and hydrogen ammonia being the most common one. It comes from natural gas from petroleum mines. Nitrogen we can handle. Phosphorus is just so much more challenging because it is it doesn't have a gaseous component. It only has a solid component, and when it leaves the farm, it's got to come back somehow. So anyway, that's phosphorus. Does anybody have questions? Yes.
Well, a couple observations. In St. Louis, in an urban environment right now, MSD, Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, is now requiring on stormwater systems plantings and all kinds of little gardens, I guess, that you have to allow the stormwater to go through before it hits a retention basin, before it goes into the streams. I guess the reason for that really is to remove some of these nutrients.
Nutrient removal is a big part of that.
Because so many of us use fertilizer in our yards and everything else. So that's a good step, I think. Although
Yeah, very positive.
it's very expensive for developers. Anyway. Do you know what MSD does locally? Do they remove any of this at the plants locally, or are they required to do that, or because there's 3 huge plants here in the St. Louis region, and I'm just wondering what they do.
I can't speak specifically to the St. Louis plants, but there is a requirement by the time effluent leaves the sewage plant, it has to fall below a maximum level of a large series of different potential contents, from actual persistent pollutants to nutrients and so they have various different mechanisms for the struvite precipitation. Can be also the one I didn't show up there was one where it just turns into a gray sludge that precipitates out, and that can be slid off. It's much sort of ickier than this nice fancy little crystal green stuff, and it does bond to some of the other persistent organic pollutants, so it's not as great to put on soils. But they've been doing that for a long time just to get phosphorus out of sewage so it doesn't go to the river.
Well, it's interesting, the effluent that leaves the MSD's plant up here in the north of us is a higher water quality than the water pulled in by the city of St. Louis water system.
Well, that's an impressive treatment
So
system.
why not just connect the one to the other?
A lot of places do.
Well, but that goes back to this whole pea in your garden or separating, that's a mental. How do you get people to be willing to do that?
I have a friend who has a bit of I think he likes to poke people a bit, but he, when people discuss the sort of, the social taboo against a composting toilet or against harvesting manure, he says, yeah, well, I mean, we could do that, but instead we do the civilized thing. We pee where we drink. It's because functionally we are getting our drinking water from the Mississippi River. We're sending our sewage effluent to the Mississippi River. Right. That's what we're doing. And it's, by the time we send it out of a treatment plant, there are high standards it does have to meet. And the better we do with not putting pollutants down the drain, the better we can do with also recovering the solid waste. With the water, we do a fantastic job now of removing the pollutants.
A lot of these things are great in a rural environment, and very difficult to do in an urban environment.
That's right. Because, again, we are condensed. Everything's concentrated. And so...
They do take sludge from MSD,
Mhm.
and I don't know what condition it is in, but they spread it out on Earth City Expressway, where all that farmland is, out
Mhm.
that flooded back in
Uh-huh.
93, whatever. And they put it on the farmland out there.
Now, is that a food producing crop or is that a like a biofuel producing crop?
I really don't know.
Okay.
It's not that-
Because we are allowed to put it on crops that are going to be used to feed to livestock, to produce a biofuel, or that are things that are not crops, like I said, road embankments, golf courses, things like that. And so if it's corn or soy that's growing out there, my guess is that it's either going to a fuel or to livestock feed.
Well, I guess if you're growing corn for ethanol,
Mhm.
then it's not going to be eaten.
Exactly.
And I don't know where that corn goes, it's, they
Right.
go out there, but the trucks do come in
Do
after the
Yeah.
harvest and all, and they plow it all under, so
Yeah.
they plant next year or so.
I mean, it certainly has to go somewhere,
Yes.
right? There's a lot of solid waste that comes out after our sewage is treated. Yes.
In Sydney, was a grand plan developed, or?
The goal of this summit was to draft the global blueprint for sustainable phosphorus. It was 3 days of brainstorming, prioritizing, listing basically steps, parties that should be held responsible for the different actions that were being proposed, and it's still on the drafting table. And as the conference is over, all of the participating parties are still engaged in dialogue over this, refining this publication, but it's going to come out. And it's still, it's recommendations for the world, what we'd like to see come out of it is a white paper, some sort of a UN directive, but I mean, it's hopefully not a pie in the sky dream.
So you're
I am optimistic. At least, at the very least, we now have a publication representing 23 different nations, and trying to represent the full range of perspectives. We had representatives from the mining industry there. We had representatives from the EPA of various countries. We had the African Nutrient Council. We had people in high-tech recovery and low-tech recovery. We had an actual farmer show up. We were really excited about that one. A farmer. Farmers in general don't have that much mobility to get to conferences or that much interest in the global issue. So I mean, we had every viewpoint we could think of represented in this dialogue, and it made for just a really enriching experience to when we came in there with our own perspectives and we realized it's so much broader than that. I tried to narrow down to 5 ways of looking at this. As you can see, those are subdivided even more into, there's people whose, environment, either they're protecting the environment or their personal economy is based on mining. We had several people from the mining industry who, when we talked about sustainable phosphorus, they said, our technology gets better every year. We discover a few more reserves each year. We have a sustainable business. Not because the way they were looking at sustainable was a very different definition. It was our business model can keep on going for a long time because the price will keep going up and we'll just keep on producing better technology. So it was a surprisingly peaceful event considering the range of viewpoints represented there. Yeah.
The bag of fertilizer has N, P, and K.
Yes.
Which is phosphorus?
P.
P.
K is potassium, N is nitrogen, and the middle number on your fertilizers is phosphorus. So if you ever buy lawn fertilizer, I guarantee you your lawn doesn't need phosphorus. It might need nitrogen. Nitrogen is what produces green growth. So if you get you see number with a hyphen between them, get a 0 in the middle. And there are actually municipalities or entire states that are now outlawing phosphorus in lawn fertilizers because they recognize it's just entirely unnecessary and it adds to their water treatment problems on the outside.
What does the phosphorus do for the plants? Is that for the root development, or do you know?
It's for cell membranes. Cell membranes are phospholipids, and the plant will uptake a very small amount of the phosphorus that you apply to the soil. And like I said, American soils are pretty phosphorus rich as a general rule, and like I said, the plant takes up very little in general. Algae are the only ones that are being held at bay by our phosphorus limitations, and they're the ones that explode when we put more phosphorus on the land.
I got here late. How much of the use of phosphorus is agriculture? Is it like 50% or 80%? Or?
Ooh, you might be getting into an area I can't answer.
Is it
A lot of it is industrially used.
Industrial, okay.
But I would say probably the vast majority is for agricultural application. I mean, we use phosphoric acid in everything from food production to etching glass. There's phosphorus in drywall, there's phosphorus in pharmaceuticals, there's phosphorus in every product you've ever put on your body. Contact solution, lotions. It's in a wide number of industrial applications. It's in detergents. There's a lot of phosphorus going around the industry side as well.
Is this kind of a recent phenomenon? I mean, 100 years ago, did they use a lot of phosphorus, or is that more recent?
I'd say 100 years ago, yes. Discovering the ability to refine phosphorus out of phosphate rock came, I don't know how long ago. Before that, the easiest thing to do was to mine old deposits of bird guano on rocks, which is very phosphorus rich. And we've actually, believe it or not, depleted the world's supply of bird poop, basically. There were thousands of years of deposits on these oceanic rocks from years and years of birds perching on them, and they were just white rocks, and they chipped away at this entire layer, and that was depleted about 100 years ago. And then we started to get into refining the phosphate rock more heavily.
So we survived for billions of years without mining it.
Right. And with improved efficiency and recovery, we can survive billions of years more without mining. After we've solved Africa's nutrient deficiency problem.
There's a lot more of us now, though.
Right. Not more.
There are a lot more of us.
Well, they said the Indians have lived on Mesa Verde out west. The population died away because they were doing all the farming on top of the mesa, and they farmed it out, and no more crops, nothing was growing, so they probably used it all up, whatever phosphorus was there.
I'm sure whatever nutrients were there ran off every time they tilled the soil.
They all died.
Which is a really interesting, I'll get to your question in just a second here. One of the things I did when I visited these farms is I tried to map their phosphorus intake and output in terms of how much had to come in order for them to produce their product. Not necessarily how much was in their product, but how much they imported. And then to qualify that, was it from a mined source or was it from a recovered source, a sustainable source? And the only sustainable source I found, none of them were applying anything precipitated from sewage or any actual sewage sludge, because they were all producing high value crops for human consumption. But one of them was using a product called Shaper liquid fish, which was made from fish, invasive carp, harvested from the Missouri and Illinois and Mississippi rivers. So it was a really neat product. And the way we look at it, the majority of the phosphorus going through these waterways, through our rivers, is from agricultural runoff. So the fish are taking up what the vegetation takes up, and they embody basically recovered phosphorus. Phosphorus that's left a farm. So by bringing those fish back onto the farm, and you remember the stories of the early Native Americans teaching the colonists to plant a fish with their corn. That's bringing phosphorus back from the ocean or back from the river onto your farm again. And that's why that works so well. The fish are very phosphorus rich. So that was kind of fascinating. Yeah, bringing it back uphill again, basically.
I was just curious when he was talking about kind of depleting the phosphorus. You talked earlier about alternating corn with soy. Is that something that helps replenish the phosphorus, or is that nitrogen?
Just nitrogen.
Just nitrogen.
Phosphorus has to come back in physical form.
Got it.
Yeah.
30 million years.
10 to 100. Somewhere in there.
Give or take. Couple weeks.
Well, thank you guys for coming.
Froggi will stick around if you have any more questions. On your way out, please grab a grocery bag or 2 or 3, and please mark your calendars for June 21st, the next Green speaker. Okay, thank you all for coming.